In a fight between UI Johan and little UI Daniel, who wins? Well, UI Johan absolutely destroys him. It's not even close. It's an actual massacre. And now that that's out of the way, I hope you all enjoyed, hope you found this informative, and I'll see you all in the next one. Okay, but seriously, Johan does win this fight, and it really isn't close. Frankly, it should be obvious why, but we wouldn't be here if it was. Before we start, let's just get this out of the way. Yes, I know Johan doesn't actually have UI, we just call him UI Johan for simplicity. The amount of times I've seen people get on me about Johan not having UI is mind-blowing. Now then, let's get into it. The first thing we need to address is how powerful UI Johan truly is. For some odd reason, the general consensus is that UI Johan can only employ the output of the holding back UI Daniel that he fought. This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. When Johan copies Daniel, he states that he can become him, that he can take on Daniel's body, the perfect body, for 10 seconds. But why does this invalidate the idea that Johan is only using the limited strength of the Daniel he fought? Well, it's quite simple. Johan specifically copied the perfect body itself, not the percentage of strength being used by the body in that moment. For those who aren't following, your body has a technical maximum output. You can control what percentage of this you employ, however, doing so does not change the body itself. Now, obviously, you can increase strength or movement through flexion and extension, but this does not change the muscular structure itself. Rather, it simply changes the pliability and rigidity of the muscles. For example, if I throw a punch at 20% power, then throw a second at 80%, the power itself is changing, but my body's muscular structure remains the same. This would logically apply to UI Daniel and the perfect body. No matter what percentage of the maximum output Daniel uses, his body is going to remain the same. Thus, as Johan is verbatim gaining the perfect body itself, he is going to have this maximum output unless for some odd reason he limits himself, which would make no sense whatsoever. So Johan, for the 10 to 15 seconds of his copy, is physically equal to Big UI Daniel and has the same performance of techniques in the way they are perfect. A common attempt to debunk this I've seen is that Johan states that he cannot perfectly replicate his fighting style due to the nature of his techniques. This is once again an example of this community completely ignoring all context, as in the next panels, Jake asks if it's impossible, and Johan says not entirely before going into a full explanation about how he can literally gain the perfect body to fight as UI Daniel. Now, before someone starts bringing up Sun, we will not be covering him in this video, as this is going to be loaded as it is, and I think he deserves a video of his own. Jesus Christ, how many scales and explanations do I need to put out now? Yusun, Sinu, Lightning Choi, the Ghost of Toon, Gabron, dear God, how am I gonna get through all of these? Okay, enough about my ever-growing workload. Now that we've established UI Johan is physically equal to full power Big UI Daniel and would thus have the same technique performance, how does little Daniel stack up? Well, he doesn't, at all. Hey, Future Tekka here. So I'm sorry if this section of the video is going to sound a bit weird. I'm doing this completely unscripted. I was just advised to add this in because it's not something I really would need to do a full video on like I would Sun, that being Zach versus Johan, because this is something that everyone is probably going to bring up in an attempt to debunk the Johan scaling, so probably a good idea to address this as it isn't going to need its own video. But yeah, the Johan that Zach fought was a weaker Johan due to the drugs. I know that's going to sound outrageous to some people for some reason, but the reason for that is simply because Johan fights at his best when he's actually employing his battle IQ, when he's thinking rationally. Even in 3A, when he is filled with rage, he still employs creative tactics like he does against Eli with his jacket, and thinks smartly, intently focusing on the fight and using the best things that he can for that moment, and not just going guns blazing and throwing caution to the wind like he does against Zach. In fact, when Johan fights Zach in this drugged state where all rationality is thrown out the window, he fights more like Vasco than he does himself. And Zach actually references that the drugs are nerfing him when Johan does go UI. He's still referencing that, oh yeah, this entire time, Johan's been kind of nerfed, and I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I lost you in this drugged up state. In fact, the reason why Johan is so predictable to Zach in this part of the fight, at least in the beginning of the fight when he's not in his UI copy, is because of the drugs, when he's just throwing things out, caution to the wind. That's why Zach is able to react to them. Now, as for the UI Johan part, this is obviously a much weaker version of UI Johan than the one that fought Yu Sun, as this version of UI Johan is not using any of the strong techniques he used against Yu Sun, minus the headstand, which is, by the way, the only attack Johan uses against Zach that actually has Duraneg properties. He doesn't use any of the James Lee Takeon that he picked up. He doesn't use any of the Sistema. He uses no Duraneg. He just goes guns blazing, caution to the wind. He has no regard for what's actually happening whatsoever. He's just filled with rage and isn't thinking things through. So yeah, this is a far weaker Johan, and also, Zach only really won off of a technicality. Remember, this is a Johan blinded with rage with no rational thinking who's throwing caution to the wind. That's why Johan got hit with that counter. The chances of that counter working on a rational thinking opponent or an opponent faster than him is frankly very, very slim. He could likely still pull it off against some people, but if Johan maintained his conscious thought and maintained his rationality, that punch likely wouldn't have landed. There's also the other issue of when it does land, it doesn't actually knock Johan out. It snaps him out of the drug state, but Johan is really perfectly fine. And had this been, a Johan that wanted to keep fighting Zach, if this wasn't a drugged Johan got hit by that, he would likely still be able to get back up and then, kill Zach then and there. So no matter which way you slice it, Johan isn't downscaled by Zach at all. Also, the only reason Zach is able to endure the few hits from UI Johan that he does before his guard breaks. In fact, actually, I think he only endured 3 hits from UI Johan before his guard broke and he got destroyed afterwards and pushed to near death, which is why he used the counter. The only reason he's able to do that is because he has the same durability as Gonsiab, one of the most durable characters in the series. So, Zach's fight with Johan doesn't downscale Johan in any regard. It's a weaker Johan, one that isn't thinking rationally, and really isn't fighting like himself. Also, he's not using his stronger techniques in Zach. So hopefully that clears that up, so nobody tries to bring that up in the comments. Now let's get back to the video. In his fight with Big UI, I'm sure most of you will say Little Daniel did really well. Some may even say he was relative to him. Well, yes, he was relative to Big UI when Big UI was holding back. In fact, not once did Big UI go all out against Little Daniel. For those that don't know, UI fights in the most efficient way possible, matching the opponent's strength and not using any more physical power than necessary. Now, this does not mean that they can miraculously become equal to someone stronger than them. There is a maximum output. It is also important to note that the level is also entirely determined by the physical strength utilized, not the techniques being used. This is something referenced by Little Daniel as he amps up his level and Big UI's strikes become heavier. To further extrapolate on this, we can look at how Big UI fights against a lot of his opponents. When fighting against weaker opponents, Big UI seems to favor utilizing his opponent's own techniques against them, almost like he is showing that he is superior. There are obvious exceptions, but said exceptions are not the norm, such as when he first fought Jerry, and this is the first time we saw UI, and PGJ was still kind of figuring that out. This is once again something we see throughout the Daniel versus Daniel fight, as Big UI just starts essentially flexing on Little Daniel, showing that he is just on a higher level. Anything Little Daniel does, Big Daniel returns in kind. It's also important to note that during the UI versus UI part of the fight, Big Daniel was lowering himself to Little UI's physical level, which is why Warren states it looks like Big UI has more experience and is more adept overall, citing that this is the reason why Daniel was currently losing, instead of referencing what would be a ludicrous gap in physicality had Big UI been giving it his all. Remember, Little Daniel's physical power is still referenced as below the king tiers, at least while not in UI. Due to the UI allowing you to bring out 100% of your body's power, we can give some benefit of the doubt and say that his physical power is on par with the strongest kings, which would explain why he's able to damage Big UI to some degree, seeing as king tiers have always kind of been shown to damage these people that are drastically above them, like Taesu versus James, where he just pulls out a full indent in James's arm from a single punch. So already things aren't exactly looking good for little Daniel, but it only gets worse from here. You see, at the end of the Daniel versus Daniel fight, Big Daniel ramps up the level a bit against Little Daniel. He still isn't going all out, but he has increased the level, and when he does so, while using the rough techniques of Jake's brother, Little Daniel gets destroyed. Including the gun technique used before the unsightly combo, Little Daniel got violently slammed in 5 moves. The second Big Daniel stopped flexing and decided to end the fight, Little Daniel went down after only 5 moves, none of which had Duraneg to our knowledge. In fact, none of the techniques used throughout the entire fight had Duraneg. So to summarize, when Big UI ramped up the level, remember he still isn't going all out, he destroyed Little Daniel in just 5 moves. To Little Daniel's credit, he was able to hit Big UI with a final kick to the temple and send him flying, which is very impressive, but it was also because Big UI was off guard. As to him, the threat was neutralized. It was also a kick to the weakest part of the skull, but that's besides the point. So, if this version of Big UI was able to absolutely destroy Little Daniel, then UI Johan, who is physically equal to a full power UI Daniel, is going to smite him. He genuinely doesn't need the 10 seconds to do so. If we were to assume that the 5 techniques Big UI Daniel utilized to finish off Little UI Daniel took a second to pull off, that would mean that Little UI Daniel got destroyed by a holding back Big UI Daniel in just 5 seconds. Now, in actuality, these hits likely came out in less than a second each, so saying he survived 5 seconds is actually being pretty generous to Little UI Daniel. And if a holding back Big UI Daniel was able to destroy him in just 5 seconds at most, what do you think a full power, not holding back UI Johan utilizing his Duraneg, which we know he can utilize, is going to do to Little UI Daniel? This isn't a Johan that's going to be nerfed by the drugs and be throwing caution to the wind. This is going to be a Johan who is holding his breath, which might I add, when he references that he's going to hold his breath to move faster, he's actively moving slightly faster than a full power UI Daniel. So a holding breath Johan, meaning a Johan moving slightly faster than the full power UI Daniel, utilizing Duraneg hits and just going for the kill, is going to absolutely destroy Little Daniel. This match is not fair, and it never was. A more fair match would be Yu Sun versus Little UI, and as much as it pains me to say it, because Little Daniel is one of my absolute favorite characters, Little Daniel still isn't winning. I love Little Daniel, but he still isn't winning against these guys. He most certainly will someday, but as it stands now, Little Daniel is a lamb to this slaughter. And there you have it. Why Little Daniel would frankly get absolutely eviscerated by UI Johan. I hope you all found this informative, and I honestly hope that I did sway some of your guys' opinions, or at the very least provided you guys a new perspective on this. If you guys do want to talk to me, please just add my Discord and set up a time. We'll set up a time, and please don't do anything dumb, because I've had people do it and that just doesn't go well. I am getting annoyed, and I really don't want that. I just want to sit down and have a nice conversation with y'all. So if you guys are willing to do that, I would be more than happy to have a nice, chill discussion with y'all. But until then, thank y'all for tuning in, have a good one, and I will see you all in the next one.